we've been talking about boundaries, and some of those, I'm just going to share what you shared with me before we came on this recording. You're on a leave day today.
Oh
yeah,
I am.
Someone got you out of office and thought it was okay to text your personal phone about an issue. Now, how do you handle that? Because they're overstepping the boundary you've set.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't handle it very well this morning because I replied.
Welcome to How to Take the Lead, the podcast where we challenge the myths and stereotypes of what it means to be a leader today and help you to succeed in post without compromise. I'm Lee Griffith.
And I'm Carrie-Anne Wade, and together we will be your guides, questioning everything we've ever learnt about leadership, sharing our experiences along the way, and inspiring you to make a real impact in your role.
Visit howtotakethelead.com for show notes, past episodes, and to join our community.
Enjoy this episode. Hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of How to Take the Lead. Today we're going to be talking about avoiding overwhelm, but before we get into the meat of that topic, I'm just going to give a quick refresh for any new listeners about how you can engage with our How to Take the Lead community. So of course you can listen via this podcast, which you might well be doing already, or watch over on YouTube. So if you're over on YouTube, hello to you. You can join our Substack community, which is very exciting, where you will get your eyes on some great updates from the episodes, which you can read, but also engage, comment, and get access to some exclusive content over there. So please do that. And you can engage through our socials. We're on Instagram and on Twitter, which you probably already know if you're a regular listener, but you can get all of that good stuff via the website, which is howtotakethelead.com. So I think that's all of the housekeeping, as I call it, at the top of the shop. And of course, I'm here joined by the lovely Lee. So how are you doing, Lee?
I'm all right, thank you. Yeah, it's getting to the end of the week. I would say I've been semi-productive this week, so I'm okay.
Okay, and you're okay with being semi-productive because I know you're usually super on it, so that's good. Good, you're listening to what everything's telling you, and a semi-productive week is a good one. It's definitely a good one. I'm glad to hear that you're well. And it's interesting that you mentioned being semi-productive because we are going to talk today about avoiding overwhelm. So in an earlier episode, the Leading When Times Are Tough episode, we talked a bit about what it feels like to be a leader right now. And I think it got us thinking and talking about kind of generally dealing with overwhelm, avoiding burnout. I'm going to use the bunny ears. I know some people probably don't like the phrase burnout. And also kind of what you can do to support yourself in some of those situations when things are feeling really tough. And I think we definitely started to think about managing boundaries. So we wanted to focus today's episode on just that. And I did a little bit of Googling in the style of the lovely Lee before this episode. And there's quite a lot of research, as you might expect out there, around kind of stress, overwhelm, burnout in leadership. And a few things caught my eye, if I'm honest with you, that I thought kind of helped to set the scene for this conversation. So the Development Dimensions International Global Leadership Forecast of 2021 revealed that nearly 60% of leaders reported that at the end of a working day, they feel used up. So exhausted, which is obviously a strong indicator of burnout. Deloitte's last year carried out some research with senior leaders, and that research indicated that 41% of senior leaders who took part in that research stated that they were stressed, and 36% said they were actually exhausted. In fact, nearly 70% of senior leaders say that burnout is affecting their ability to make decisions, and up to 69% of executives were actually thinking about quitting because of the impact on their well-being. I think there's some fairly full-on sort of statistics that might indicate how leaders are feeling at the moment in terms of that overwhelm and stress.
And we've seen it, haven't we, recently with some pretty high-profile figures in the political sphere stepping away from their roles, basically saying they haven't got anything left in the tank to give to the role. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think leadership burnout can occur when you experience the long-term stress of your job, or you've been working in what might be considered to be a draining role for a long time. But I also think there's a kind of burnout is there when maybe you feel like the impact that you're expecting to have in your role is perhaps not really coming to fruition. The results that
Mm,
you want to produce are not really there, and you can feel a bit disengaged and a bit disillusioned as a result of that. So I think we are in agreement that being in leadership positions can feel very stressful. And clearly, it's something that leaders are starting perhaps to be more vocal about now in terms of that burnout and that overwhelm. So, I want to just have a conversation about that and see where that takes us today. But I actually, if you don't mind, Lee, wanted to start with asking you whether you have any personal experience as a leader of overwhelm or burnout and how that impacted on you and your wider team. And I know you've shared some of this before, but I thought a
yeah.
good opportunity to really dig in and find out a bit more about your personal experience, Lee.
So we're jumping straight in, aren't we?
We are
There's no
jumping
there's,
straight
there's
in.
no
There's no
warming
hiding.
up.
There's no hiding. We said this year was going to be the year of action, that we were just going to go straight in there, get gritty and talk about the important stuff. So no warm up. I've given you the stats. You probably, as are many other leaders, one of those stats, or you have been in the past. So yeah,
Mm,
over to you to share some of your own experience before we maybe talk about what people can do to support themselves.
yeah. Wow. Where do I start? I mean, I think there were probably two separate occasions in which I strongly identified as being in a place of burnout. Um, I think the first time it happened, there was a lot of different factors that contributed to it. So, we were going through a really big crisis at work. It was quite a toxic environment. I'd moved house. I had a health scare. And all those things together were really stressful. And I remember on one occasion, actually going to a hospital appointment, and I was called by my boss at the time to be hauled over the coals for nothing. And I'd prepped for the thing that they were calling me about. My deputy had been briefed, and was more than capable of dealing with the issue. But this individual purposely called me to make a point and to try and intimidate me, it felt at the time. And I don't know what their motivation was, but it was a result of actions like that from individuals, and um, feeling constantly undermined by people in the organization and that individual, and then feeling like I was taking a massive burden for my team because I didn't really want to share what was going on. I was working really long hours because there never seemed to be enough time. And I got really sick as a result of everything that's going on. And I'm actually on lifetime medication for that now. And it got to a point where every time the phone rang, I'd feel anxious. I dreaded kind of going into the office. I avoided talking to people. I'd range from feeling super angry about the situation to feeling really tearful. And I didn't feel like I could be open about that and what I was going through at work, A, because of the culture at the time. And I thought it would make me feel even more alienated. And as I said, I didn't want my team to know how bad it was. I wanted to protect them from that. And in some ways, I think I probably protected them too much because they probably either thought I was being OTT or I was failing in my job because I didn't really share some of the stuff that was going through. And that was like quite a sustained period of time. It happened over several months, and as I say, I did get quite ill as a result of it. But I worked through it and eventually kind of pulled myself out through the other side, and things changed in the organization and whatnot, and I learned how to cope with some of the things that I was going through. I think the second time I then experienced was a couple of years later, and I was in a different organization, and it was actually what led me to leave the NHS in the end. And I suppose it was because I saw what had happened to me the last time, and I didn't want to go back to that place. Even though I was unwell again, I wasn't managing my health conditions very well. And I wasn't really looking after myself. I had a lack of sleep. I was dealing with new toxic behaviours in a different place, all of that kind of stuff. I didn't have the stress that perhaps I felt the first time. It was more a sense of overwhelm and a frustration and an anger, actually, that was literally chewing. I feel a lot of stuff in my stomach, and that was one where I was really feeling that anger chewing through me, and then that began to turn into an apathy, and I knew if I stayed, I wasn't going to be doing right by myself, obviously,
Mm.
but I wasn't going to be doing right by my team and ultimately the people we were there to serve. So I took a step away, and it's probably, as I've explained on the show before, I kind of went away on a long holiday, and that was the first time I really started to reflect on how I was feeling, and I just thought, this isn't worth it. So came back from the holiday, handed my notice in straight away. I wasn't going to get back into that place. So yeah, I've kind of, um, and it took a long time to recover. Actually, when I left the NHS, I had a good few months off, and it's taken a long time to process and a long time to get over some of the anger that I felt for having had to go through some of that. Sorry, that was a long.
No, it's not long. I was just composing myself because you know me, I probably shed a little tear and I'm like, oh. And I've heard you obviously on the show, but personally as well, share your story before, and every single time it still has such an impact, I think. And I think there's something about that second time round, you recognizing kind of the signs and making that decision that you didn't want to be back in that space personally because you knew that it wasn't good for you. And I think that's very courageous of you to do that. And there are other people probably who maybe don't even know how to recognise the signs, which might be something we'll come on to shortly.
I recognise my privilege as well, that I was able to make that step away the second time, and I recognised that not everyone has that luxury or that ability to do so, and people have to, put up because they've got other commitments or, security and all of that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. So I do recognise that there was a huge privilege that played into my ability to step away.
Yeah. And it's just, I reflect on what you say, like so many things that we've talked about in different episodes of this podcast, play into kind of your experience. So, that culture in an organization and what that's like, the toxic behaviors potentially that people are displaying and then having an impact on
Mm.
individuals. And we have talked as well before about that personal well-being kind of piece, haven't we, a little bit in various different episodes where, you are a leader, but you also have a life outside of work. And there's something about, how much that overwhelm, stress, burnout is starting to impact on all aspects of your life. But equally, the fact that we're all human beings and we have things going on outside of our working life as a leader that are going to impact the way we feel when we wake up in the morning, because we've all got
Yeah.
those other stresses. So you almost can't sometimes always take out like, this is about my role and being a leader, and that's what's overwhelming me. But you can't take that away from some of the other things that are happening in life.
And I think there's also, the whole reason we do this show is to challenge some of the stereotypes of, and I think this is a prime example of the stereotype, because I know certainly, when I was going through it the first time, um, what was the narrative that was being played out was you had to show strength, you couldn't show weakness, you couldn't show vulnerability, you weren't able to say, I can't do this, you weren't able to, you had to just battle through. And there was and I played into this. I'm sure I've been judgmental of other people at times when you've seen that they've not been able to cope. Oh, they're not up to the job, blah blah blah. And until you're in the position, it can be hard to empathize with
Mm.
that. But there is very much this kind of narrative, and it still exists in organizations. This isn't a historic thing. But there is that narrative that plays out of you can't show that you're, things like what's your mental well-being or looking after yourself. There's this expectation that if you're a leader, you must always be on, you
Yeah.
must always be available, you must always work, you've got to kind of fight to the nth degree. And even now I see people on social media who poo-poo this idea of a work-life balance for leaders. There's no such thing. And I think there is. I think it might look different, but
Yeah.
there is. And I think that's part of the reason why we are so passionate about showing that there is a different way. It is through our lived experience, but it is also through recognizing that we're only going to change cultures of organisations and the way things happen if we start to tackle some of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yes, 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 yes. And yeah, and it is that thing, isn't it, of that age old kind of, if you show vulnerability, you're showing that you can't cope and therefore you're a failure and you shouldn't be in that role.
Yeah.
And, what example are we setting to other people if we're just, creating a leaders who just have to put a brave face on everything and deal with it, regardless of how that's impacting them
Yeah.
personally. And you've talked about impacts on your wider team. It isn't always just about you
No.
personally. Actually, if you are in a space where you're overwhelmed but not finding a way to be able to get support with that and deal with that, then actually that does have an impact on the people that you're working with around you. So
Yeah. How about you? What's your experience been?
I think I've through my career, I think I've been very good at just getting on with it. Early doors, when I've started to feel like the role is very stressful, or it's probably been more in examples where it's the politics, and you talked a bit about the toxic behaviours, that bit that's caused levels of stress for me, where I felt like I just can't cope with this and I don't know if I want to cope with it. But I think
Yeah.
I've just done that, as you've said, that kind of get your head down and just get on with it. But the impact that that's had for me is that I've not felt, on reflection, I've not felt that I valued myself and my contribution or the contribution of my team through doing that, because
Mm.
my coping mechanism was just keep your head down and just do what you need to do and get on with it, rather than actually question whether this is okay and be able to feel like I can be vulnerable and honest and say I'm not dealing with this very well. I
Yeah.
think for me, the times when I've had that, it's kind of manifested in just feeling disengaged and feeling really tired. Like I
Mm.
just don't have the energy emotionally, mentally, physically to give it my all. That's
Yeah.
probably how it's manifested for me. And it's been impacted by the type of leader that I've worked with. So when
Yeah.
my boss has been empathetic, compassionate, open about their own vulnerabilities, that's created a safe space to have those conversations about mine. Where I've worked for a boss or a leader who has had that horrible old school stereotype that we've just talked about, and it's just like, if you even say you're having a bad day, then you're a failure. That's been when it's been really difficult to manage, and I think I've probably just retreated and been like what do I just need to deliver, but without
Yeah.
kind of motivation to really
Yeah.
feel passionate about it.
But you get I don't know about you, but there's a guilt then that plays in when you take, because I've done that, retreating. We talked about a bit about this in the quiet quitting episode, that sense of stepping back sometimes because it's just not worth it. But then you're giving power to the people who are the bullies, or
Hmm.
creating the old stereotypes, and there's a guilt associated with
Yeah.
that, which I kind of, now in my feisty kind of mode, I want to go back and go, right,
Yeah.
I'm not standing
Challenge
for
it.
it. And
Yeah.
I did challenge it in the end, in my way. I did challenge it and it didn't turn out particularly well. But um, it took a long time and a lot of
Yeah.
courage to think to challenge that. And yeah, you do realise you do perhaps sometimes, and sometimes you need to do it because you're protecting yourself. Sometimes you're doing it for an easier life, but
Hmm.
actually sometimes you need to do it because you need to do it to set the precedent, stand up
Yeah.
for other people who perhaps aren't as privileged as you.
Absolutely. And it sounds like a cliche, but since hitting 40, I've just decided, actually, you know, we you talked about what we're here for. It's time to take some action and challenge. And I do feel more confident, whether that's with age, experience, being just too tired of it all, to not speak out and say, actually, it's okay. And the times that I have been vulnerable with my own team or with my leadership team in my organization in recent years, that's actually had really positive impacts,
Mm,
which can only be a good thing, I guess. So I'm going to move us on a little bit because I'm very conscious of the time. Just briefly to talk about, we've said we've got these coping mechanisms. We've talked about a few of our own, but how can you recognise as a leader when things are starting to become overwhelming? So hopefully you can take some action a bit sooner than perhaps some of our examples have shown.
yeah. Well, the signs for me were tiredness was a big one. I know I wasn't getting enough sleep because my alarm was going off at 4 in the morning. I wasn't getting home until after 8 o'clock in the evening. I was feeling really wired because of that lack of sleep, which meant that I couldn't fall asleep. So that continues to be a big symptom for me, is recognizing when my sleep goes awry. Emotions being all over the place, as I've kind of mentioned, tiredness, impatience, frustration, sadness. Sometimes I almost had an OTT energy because I had that kind of frustration trying to get out somehow. That sense of not feeling in control, that pressure of everything that you need to achieve, the never-ending to-do list, that feeling like you're failing. Everyone wants a bit of you when you start sensing some of those emotions at play. Certainly when I work with leaders now, it's things like they're recognizing they're working too much in the weeds, they're micromanaging a bit too much, they talk about lacking confidence, maybe they're not taking people with them, or people are being lost in the confusion of their thinking because they haven't got that clarity. All are warning signs that things are getting out of control. Um, but as you kind of said at the outset, there are so many different things that can trigger that sense of burnout and overwhelm. It is about how satisfied you are in your job. It is your work condition, and the environment you work in, your salary, relationships with people, how valued you feel. So there are, maybe your personal warning signs, but then there can be environmental factors that you need to be tuned into.
Yeah, and it's that point you make, you tuning in, I think is the important point there, isn't it? And being able to see early on that some of
Mm,
these things are at play so that you can take some sort of action to either change the course or
yeah,
make a stand, whichever action it
yeah.
is that feels it's important. But yeah, definitely lots of ways that can manifest, I think. And it's just having that understanding for yourself about what that feels and looks like for you as a leader, for sure. So um, I guess we like to try and share some practical things or
Yeah.
ways that people can take action. And for me, I think boundary setting is a really important part of
Mm,
helping you to avoid that overwhelm as a leader, or as anybody, not just as a leader.
yeah.
And it's something that I talk a lot about with people that I work with through the mentoring that I do. Um, the one thing I would say around boundary setting is it takes practice, and I'm not always as good at keeping my own boundaries as I am at telling others to set theirs. But I do think it is an essential thing to reflect on and to start to practice. And
Mm,
Brené Brown, in her Dare to Lead book, says that in the work that she's done over many years, one of the things that she found weirdly shocking, I think I would say, is that the most compassionate people and leaders that she has interviewed over that 13 years, she said, were actually the most boundaried people that she came into contact with. And I think what she was kind of saying is that if we don't set boundaries, we let people do things that are not okay. And I think that is a really important thing to think about as a leader, both personally for you, and for your wider organization and the people that you work with. So I was just interested to get your view on boundary setting, and if you see that as an important part of being a leader.
yeah. And we talked about this quite a lot in the quiet quitting episode. So I don't want to rehash some of the ground we covered there, but com- completely agree. I think for me, boundary setting is the standard that you set. Your boundaries and how you respect other people's boundaries are really important, and says a lot. And actually, I've been having a conversation with someone on my in my DMs this morning about this exact topic, because if you set boundaries and then you either don't communicate them or you don't protect them, then that's when you can cause problems. Because if you don't respect your own boundaries, why should anyone else respect them? I think that's where confusion and chaos can reign in the how you how you communicate what your boundaries are. If you give mixed messages and all of that kind of stuff, you create a rod for your own back. And I've been there and done that, so I recognise it. So I think boundary setting is so important, and um, I do think there's a bit of a stigma attached around boundary setting. I think that people feel either a bit awkward because they've got boundaries. Obviously, there's a stigma, as we said in the Quiet Quitting episode, of if you're young and have boundaries, you're labelled being a snowflake and all of that kind of stuff. And then if you're a people pleaser or you don't like conflict, all of those kind of things can play in around boundaries as well.
That was me holding my hand up and confessing.
So there's a whole load of discomfort around the notion of boundaries, isn't there? But
Absolutely. But there's part of me that feels like that's why it's really important to talk about them. And even as an individual, to kind of reflect on what your boundaries might actually be. Because it almost sounds quite lofty to say I'm setting myself some boundaries. But actually what we're talking about is just doing things that protect you, your time, your energy, make you reflect on kind of the sort of relationships that you want to build with people and what behaviours you would deem to be acceptable and maybe what you wouldn't, and what you might challenge. So I think maybe as well sometimes the term boundary setting is what makes people feel a bit like, oh, a bit weird and a bit awkward.
They feel like they're these big massive things, but really small things can be boundaries. It could be as simple as, I'm not going to have 1 hour meetings. I'm going to keep my meetings to 45 minutes so that I have a 15-minute gap between a meeting so that I can do some self-care, go to the toilet, make a cuppa, decompress after it or whatever, prepare myself for the next meeting. That's a boundary.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good example. And I think it's important that people reflect on the practical things that leaders can actually do in terms of boundary setting. And some of that's actually just to consider what are the important boundaries to you. And I do an exercise with people who join the Thrive programme around boundary setting, just to get people to reflect on what's important. And we have the start of 3 sentences, and then actually there's time to reflect on what the end of those sentences might be. And it's things around like, people may not treat me, whatever that behavior might be that you're not going to accept somebody treating you like, to protect my time and energy. It's okay to, mine would be not respond to emails straight away. Because I think there's an expectation, that leaders will behave in a certain way in the workplace. And actually it's up to you to kind of set the tone for how you are going to behave and what those boundaries are. So have you got any practical tips around leaders actually putting boundary setting into practice, Lee?
I mean, as you say, there are so many different ways in which a boundary can manifest. So it could be what's your approach to meeting with people, how you have protected space, whether you take a lunch break. I know leaders who say, well, I'm going to take my kids to school 3 days a week, so I'm not going to come in at the crack of dawn, even though that might be expected of me. Or certain people will make sure that all their team take a lunch break. That's quite boundaried. It could be the types of things that you get involved with and don't get involved with. So it could be around just being really clear around some of your standards of, this is what I deal with at this level, and I'm not going to get down into the weeds to work on this project or that project. So I think there's lots of different ways in which you can establish your boundaries. It kind of depends where I like to align it a little bit to your strategy and what you're trying to achieve and how it fits with your personal life and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, really, really good tips. And I think an opportunity for leaders to start maybe doing some reflection about what their personal boundaries might need to be. The boundaries they have set, they're really putting into practice. So I think boundary setting.
How about you?
Oh, my boundaries,
says me, who often says to you, where are your boundaries?
Well, I'll be really honest. I can tell over the last 3 weeks that I am starting to feel the overwhelm with lots of different things that are going on in work and life at the moment, because my practicing my boundary setting has been really poor. And actually the fact that my accountability buddies like you actually message me and go, it doesn't feel very boundaried, is a sign for me that perhaps things are feeling a bit overwhelming for me at the moment, and that I might need to take some action around how I can start to manage some of that. So that's quite an interesting reflection for me at the moment. But for me, over time, I think my boundaries have been partly about how I protect my own time and energy and resource, partly how I protect that of my team, but also a lot more, I guess, because of personal experience around behaviours and
Mm,
how
mm,
what behaviour I deem to be acceptable in the
mm,
space in which I'm working as a leader, and whether I can role model the good behaviours and check myself when I'm not. But equally, that I feel that I can challenge those behaviours in other people when they're starting to have a negative impact. So for
yeah,
me, that's kind of what's been important in terms of my own sense of like stress and overwhelm in the workplace as a leader. But it's just about practice for me, practicing doing them, checking when you're not, having people that tell you you're not being boundaried and taking that on board and maybe resetting those boundaries for yourself feels really important. So it's interesting that I've talked about accountability buddies and you being one of them with checking my overwhelm and my boundary situation, because often leadership is described as quite a lonely place to
mm,
be and a lonely role. And Tim Cook, who took over as Apple CEO from Steve Jobs, did describe the job as that. He said it is sort of a lonely job, and I think that probably sometimes can feel like a true reflection, but your support network and who you surround yourself with can be really important, not only for dealing with that sense of loneliness, but supporting that overwhelm, avoiding that burnout, and looking after your well-being. So what advice have you got for leaders in that space, Lee?
I think, I mean, we've talked before about your support network and being able to, and it feels such a dry uh, a way of assessing your relationships, but being able to categorize people of what is their value add to be in that support network for you. So for me, I look at who are those people that are in my safe space. So the people that I trust that I can offload to, but that will show me maybe that tough love if needed, or might give me a different perspective or share helpful advice and guidance. That's a really important facet in my support network. Um, when I felt overwhelmed and struggled with that in the past, obviously the role that my friends and family have played to that, but also just identifying who those work colleagues who kind of got me, or people who would make me laugh and I could just go to, and people find black humor, don't they, in dark situations, and there were definitely a couple of people that I've worked with in the past who would be relied on to, I could go and we could just get really sweary and just
Laugh
take the
it
mickey out
out.
and laugh it out. And I needed that as much as I needed someone that would perhaps give me a more pragmatic approach to dealing with a situation. And then I had my coach, that they were incredibly important to me when I was going through some of this stuff, because they were my ultimate safe space, and I was able to explore and I could tackle some of that really tricky stuff that I just couldn't verbalize anywhere else. So it's about recognizing, it doesn't need to be a massive group, but it is about recognizing who are those 4, 5, a handful of people that serve some kind of purpose, and recognizing the purpose you serve for them as well, because it's a
Yeah.
two-way street, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you say about your coach being really important, because I found the same, but also I have found that at times when it feels very overwhelming in the workplace, when things have got quite stressful, it can be the things like your sessions with your coach that get
Mm,
deprioritized. Is that the right word that I'm using there?
yeah.
Because you feel like I haven't got the time, I can't take X amount of hours out of my day to have that coaching session, for example. So you kind of don't do it. And actually, it is really important to protect that time to have
Yeah.
that input and those conversations, if that's
Yeah.
what really helps you to manage that overwhelm. So again, and maybe another signal, if you're thinking I haven't got time to have my coaching session, or I need to move it, or you know people who are part of my support network have asked to catch up and I'm not making the time to do it, that actually that's the time when you really
Mm.
to do it. That would definitely be my reflection.
I think your support network, though, is only one part of that well-being piece that you need to take care of when you're a leader, because I don't think you can put all your dependency on a support network. You've got to find other ways to manage that. So we've talked a bit about that health and well-being piece. So for me, it's as much about what I eat, my exercise. I started journaling, and I find that quite a therapeutic way to offload some of my thinking when I'm feeling particularly stressed or troubled. My sleep discipline, not compromising some of those things have been really important. And I discussed that. I had a session only a few days ago where we were discussing some of those things that seem to be the first to go out the window when things get troubled. Yet, if you're not looking after yourself, you're going to be of no value to
Right.
anyone else. Um, I made friends with people who were teachers at my classes at the gym, for example, and they didn't know what I was going through, but they created that sanctuary that I could go and switch off and all of that. They were part of my support network, and they didn't even realize it
Yeah.
because I was taking responsibility, that I had no burden on them, but they were very much became part of how I was managing my situation. And I think self-management is really, really important. And we often overlook that boundaries is one part of it, but it's how you organize the way you work, how you stay on top of what needs to be done, and have a process, I suppose, of offloading all those worries and the niggles. And I've worked with CEOs who would be up in the middle of the night just worrying about all the stuff that they'd have to do and writing massive to-do lists or sending email, getting in at crack of dawn and sending emails to everyone with everything. And we went through a really simple exercise of just setting up a Trello board between them and their PA.
The only
Honest,
reason I laugh because you are the Trello queen. So I'm like, why am I not surprised?
but this Trello board was this place that became a really clear line of sight of what was happening in this chief exec's world and in their office. They didn't have to bombard their kind of PA with loads of emails or all hours of the day and night. They could look on Trello and find an update for that piece of work or whatever. They could also log a query if they didn't find the answer there, and the PA would go in and answer it. And also having it all in one place created this real clear line of sight between the two of them around, right, well, what are the priorities? This is all the stuff we've got on. How do we prioritize it? And how much work have we got on our plate? Part of that thing of managing your time blocking, all of that became easier once you get a clear line of sight of everything that you've got on your plate. There's a lot of plates there.
I'm also going to say other tools are available. To a Trello queen, there are other tools available if Trello is
Notion.
not your bag. um, I absolutely agree. And some of the things for me in terms of like practical stuff has been around changing the way that I manage my to-do list. So I don't have a list anymore because that list was never ending and that was overwhelming in itself. And I split my stuff into what I could do in 5 minutes, what's a 30-minute job, what's the project, and what are my non-negotiables. And that works much better for me than just having this long, massive list that I use. So there are some real practical things about how you organise yourself, I think, that can be really helpful. And also agree, you have to take responsibility for your own well-being. And as you said, support from others is one part of that. But, you have to manage things like taking time off. Like saying, actually, this weekend, I am not going to look at my work emails, answer work calls, because I'm spending time with other people that are really important to me and I want to be present in that moment, or I want to focus on getting out there and doing a big long walk or whatever it is. So it is really important, isn't it, to know what those other things are that support your well-being outside of being a leader, and making sure that you prioritize those and make the time for them.
And we've been talking about boundaries, and some of those, like, I'm just going to share what you shared with me before we came on this recording. You're on a leave day today.
Oh yeah,
someone got you out of office and thought it was okay to text your personal phone about an issue. Now, how do you handle that? Because they're overstepping the boundary you've set.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't handle it very well this morning because I replied. But I did reply directing them to somewhere else, which was on my out of office. So there you go. But yeah, absolutely. That kind of creating that space and time for you outside of work, I think, is important to switch off, reset, refocus, have a rest is really, really important to do. And like you say, that's just going to make you better at leading when you go back into that workspace, because you can't be on 24/7.
And recognizing, so one of my biggest learnings, and we've talked about it in the introvert extrovert episode, as an introvert, I need time to recharge my introvert battery. That's become part of my planning now. I wasn't great at recognizing that when I was in my corporate role, certainly not in the earlier days, but towards the end, I definitely was. But recognizing kind of the type of person you are and what you might need, and not just assuming that you are the same as any other person.
So I'm conscious of time. This episode has run
We
away
could
with us.
talk
We
forever,
could talk
couldn't we?
forever about this, but hopefully people have got some useful kind of prompts and things to reflect on from that conversation. But as always, we like to end with some top takeaways. So what would your top takeaways for leaders today be if they're feeling a bit overwhelmed by life as a leader?
I think if you're in that place at the minute where you're in the spiral of feeling overwhelmed, it can feel really hard to work out how to extract yourself from that and to do something about it, because you almost don't have the time or space to tackle it. And we've talked a little bit about that already. And that almost then perpetuates the issue, doesn't it? That carries on. So I think the best thing you can do is just start somewhere. What one thing could be changed, could be better, and be ruthless in, I suppose, questioning the value add to create the space to make that one thing happen. So it might be, right, I need to find an hour today to figure my shit out. So looking at my diary, I'm going to be really ruthless. Do I need to attend every one of these meetings? Are there things that I can ditch, delegate, defer? Should I be doing this? Is this at the level that I'm adding value, or can someone else pick that up? I bet you 90% of the time you can find an hour in your day. You've just got to be, you've got to be honest. Not everyone needs you all the time. So sometimes it's about what you're going to give up to give yourself something.
Absolutely. I would agree. Prioritize your needs because they are important. Is definitely part of that, isn't it? Find that hour if that's what you need. So, I am absolutely all, and I'm loving your ditch and delegate, defer. I think that's a really good approach to take to things. And for me, I guess slightly longer term, I would just suggest that people start to reflect on what the signs are for them personally when that overwhelm's starting to kick in. So hopefully they can recognise that earlier. And have a think about one or two things that you can do to step outside of that space, whether that's going for a coffee, planning time to spend with a person that's really important to you, may or may not be part of your support network, booking a break, whatever it is that you need to do, get outside, go for a walk. Just make sure you know those couple of things that give you that opportunity just to breathe, reset and reflect, I think would be my top takeaways. So I'm sure we'll revisit some of this in other conversations because it feels like a space where we've got a lot to say. And there's a lot of evidence to prove that leaders are being really challenged by this sense of burnout and overwhelm at the moment. So hopefully that episode was helpful. Please do share it with other people if you think there's somebody who could benefit from listening or watching. Leave us a review or a rating if you so wish. And until next time, we'll see you shortly. Thanks for listening to today's episode.
Don't forget to hit follow and share the show with someone you know. Oh, that rhymes.
A rating or review will be much appreciated.
If you're looking for some leadership inspiration, why not get a free copy of our recommended reading list? Visit howtotakethelead.com to download.
Until next week, get out there and take the lead.